Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for coming into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theatre. And today we're here to talk about the wonderful new BBC America series, Baby Chimp Rescue, with the wonderful Shinner, who is the executive producer and also heads up BBC Natural History Unit, and Lindsey Parietti, who's the creator, writer, and all-round kind of spearheader of this wonderful project. And Lindsey, I wanted to dive in by asking you a little bit about the genesis of this project, because it came off the back of your student BAFTA winning short film Blood Island, which was about a different space in Liberia and a different kind of like chimp support organization. But Jenny Desmond, who is in this series, was actually part of that. And so I wanted to ask you about the original genesis of Blood Island and how you kind of came to know about the work there and the way that then lent itself to this series.
Yeah, sure. So Blood Island is a story about a group of chimpanzees who were used in medical research from the 1970s until about 2005 when they were retired onto these islands. And the organization that was experimenting on them promised them care for life and then pulled out a few years later, which is when Jenny and her husband Jimmy stepped in to kind of orchestrate their emergency care and make sure the chimps, stayed alive and had what they needed along with a team in Liberia. And I found out about their work pretty offhand through a talk actually at a zoo in Bristol, and immediately was really interested in their story, reached out to Jenny, asked if I could come, film what they were doing. And that's how I met her and the relationship with the Desmonds started. And then I found out about their rescue work of the babies, which was quite new. So they had only been there, I think, a year or two when I went out to meet them. And that story of the rescue baby chimps, which eventually formed the series, hadn't really been told in long form TV in any way. So I brought it to Joe at the BBC with our presenter Ben, and that's how we started making the show.
Mm-hmm. And Joe, you mentioned how whenever you're looking at different possible projects, that you're always looking for kind of new and different ways to tell stories and new approaches with different subcontexts. And so I wanted to ask you kind of like, what were the things that you felt like this particular project was bringing that gave a new and different voice to that space within environmental storytelling?
So first of all, it's a really important story to tell, I think all stories in the natural world at the moment are affected by the changes, by habitat shrinkage, by poaching. All animals and nature are suffering at the moment to various degrees, and really these stories have to get out there. In order to tell these stories, it's great to have a real life story to wrap around it, to fantastic contributors. Jimmy and Jenny are just really genuinely wonderful people. And it's in a country that not many people know that much about. Liberia is not, that often in the news. If it is, it's usually for civil unrest or Ebola or some awful reason. So a story of hope and possible redemption seems to be really apt in this situation.
Yeah. And kind of to that point that Joe was just mentioning, Lindsey, I wanted to ask you a lot about the subcontext that comes forth within the series. It is really focused on this sanctuary, but there's a lot of backdrop of elements of cultural and political elements going on in Liberia. And prior to going and getting your MA, I know that you were doing a lot of print and video journalism, and was curious about whether that was a really conscious choice on your part or whether that just kind of was naturally part of the story you wanted to tell.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the things that drew me to Liberia in the first place. As Joe mentioned, a lot of the headlines coming out of Liberia for the decade prior to us making the show were about Ebola and civil unrest and really sort of dark things. And one of the things I look for in a story or like to try to do is, go deeper and maybe tell more positive stories from places where all we hear is really negative headlines in the West, and just show an aspect of that culture and country that doesn't really come through. And then with natural history storytelling as well, like I'm very interested in the environmental aspect of it, as Joe also mentioned. I think it's impossible to tell stories about the natural world now that just paint a pretty picture. There's always more context, and usually it's political as well as environmental. So I think that just all it weaves together, and we tried to keep it as, part of the show while, you get to enjoy the cute chimps, but there's also a lot of context about what's happening in Liberia and the plight of the Western chimpanzee in general.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's always really fascinating about nonfiction storytelling is the fact that, the story itself continues to evolve even during the development process. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about what that development process looked like between the two of you and the rest of the creative team, and kind of what were some of the aspects that really came to light during that initial development and research process that were really valuable once you then had the crew on location and were actually filming the series.
Well, I mean, so first and foremost, it's an observational documentary series. So the good thing is that it's real, and we were following the action, and we were there filming for a year. We were following them over a year. But within that, there are obvious sort of touch points. We knew that they had a goal. They had a goal to work towards. So they were hoping to raise enough money to have the funds to build a much bigger semi-wild space for these chimps. So therefore, that's a driving factor through it. There were certain things we knew would happen, like they needed to give lessons to the baby chimps because they'd lost their mothers and they were orphans. They did need to learn how to climb or, dip for ants and all this kind of thing. So there were certain things that we knew, but we didn't know how they would unfold. And that's the sort of joy, the happiness and the pain of making obstocs, because, just hoping that. So with the rescues, of course, we had no idea, when a rescue would happen, if a rescue would happen. But I mean, the really sad thing is that Lindsey, how many were there when we first arrived? About 20?
Yeah, about 20. When the first rescue was number 20, I think, when we got there.
Yeah, and now that it's in the 60s,
yeah,
I think. So, a lot of, as soon as the word got out, people did bring the babies to them. So, the numbers did mount. So yeah, there were certain things that we knew we could touch on, and then certain things that we expected would happen, and then after that it was just all the chaos of everyday life, which we knew was a rich theme for a documentary in any case, because these baby chimpanzees are so adorable, and Jimmy and Jenny are so dedicated and such wonderful people, as I said. So just with that, we had a great film.
Mm-hmm. And, to that point of it being an observational documentary, and that's one of the things that BBC especially seems like very adept at. How did you, for this particular environment, kind of like work with the crew to make sure that you were going to be coming in the most unobstructive way, that you wouldn't be kind of hindering and changing their environment, even though they would be there filming and kind of needing to be quite close up every day?
Do you want to answer that, Lindsey, as you were one of the crew? I mean, this was led by Jimmy and Jenny, who had definite protocols in place, didn't they?
Yeah, so they had protocols for the chimps in the sanctuary and how they let any outsiders come in. And obviously we had privileged access as being able to follow them for a year. Most people wouldn't be allowed to come and visit for that long. But I think it was about just building that trust that everything we did was, according to their guidelines and with the best interests of the chimps at heart. Like, all of these babies have been traumatized and have spent some time in human care, like after being taken away from their families who were killed. So it was really important to us, not to do any further harm. And we just took cues from Jimmy and Jenny and from our presenter, Ben Garrett, who's also a chimpanzee expert, who'd be watching their behavior and making sure they're always comfortable and, limiting filming hours to an amount that was manageable for them.
Mm-hmm. Was there also a bit of a journey and a process in terms of just like researching and understanding their behaviors a little bit more in depth before you arrived at all?
Yeah, that's part and parcel of every film. Super in-depth research on everything, definitely.
Yeah. And in terms of even just like the logistics with your crew as well, because, they are unpredictable animals, and there are moments that we see within the series, such as when they bring a new rescue home that's quite fearful and escapes for a moment, that there can be an element of danger within this sort of storytelling. So how did you kind of also, again, like work with Jenny and Jimmy and just make sure that your crew were going to be as safe as possible if situations like that popped up and arose?
you want me to answer that?
Sure, either. Yeah.
I think Jenny and Jimmy's lives are quite unpredictable. Like as Joe said, we never knew when a rescue was going to come in or when they would get a call to go out and do a rescue. They work with wildlife authorities in Liberia who go with them, but a lot of times they're the leading experts there on chimpanzees. So everybody, including the police, is taking their cues from Jimmy and Jenny in terms of how to handle the animals. And it just varied situation by situation, just keeping good communication with the Desmonds about what to do in the event of certain situations. And there was a lot of planning on the BBC end of things about situations we might face and how we would approach them.
Mm-hmm. And Lindsey, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about just some of the logistical challenges of filming there. I know when you're making Blood Island that you'd mentioned that, humidity was one of the things that caused camera malfunctioning, and especially being there over the space of a year, you had all sorts of different incremental weather moments within that. And so kind of like what were the logistical challenges that came off the back of the location that you were filming in on this project?
I think the hardest thing with this project was the baby chimps jumping all over all of the equipment. So they're just, so close to you all the time and so interested in new things in their environment and really curious and very cheeky. So the moment you're not paying attention to them, they're like jumping on your sound recording equipment or on the camera. And with the numbers mounting over time, that definitely became an increasing challenge for us with the kit for sure.
And then I wanted to ask you both a little bit about, Ben, who you were mentioning, who's on location, he's on site, but also is kind of presenting, but then you also have voiceover narration, and how you really thought about and structured the way that you wanted to not just present the story, but also the information that you're conveying as well, because it is capturing both elements of that within those two parts.
Yeah, so Ben was really as like a sort of super contributor, because he he's known Jimmy and Jenny for many, many years. They've worked together with Jane Goodall and in the international chimpanzee community. So they're old mates, and working with them on their new project. This new project was something that he's always wanted to do, and he's been fundraising for them a lot in the UK and prior to going out there. And he felt that, he really had a specific role to play. Jimmy and Jenny are both a breaking point in terms of incredibly busy and everything, and really did need, as much help as they could get. And as an expert like them, but as an expert on chimpanzees, he brought a lot specifically to teaching the baby chimpanzees their lessons and hopefully preparing them for a semi-wild existence.
Mm-hmm. Was there kind of much of a conversation or a journey with Jimmy and Jenny in terms of how you wanted them to interact with the camera? The majority of the time it is observational, but there are moments where even when they're with the chimps, they're still kind of giving some sort of information that's important to camera. There's a couple of talking head moments, but they're still always on location. But then again, also Jenny had worked with you on Blood Island and has been in a lot of video pieces and news pieces and seems to be very natural in front of the camera. So was it much of a process and a journey with them and figuring out the nuances of that, or did it come very naturally?
I think Jenny is really, as you said, she is very natural on camera. She's worked in, marketing and things prior to changing her whole life to do this chimpanzee rescue with Jimmy. So there was some directing of them on location, but yeah, we wanted it to feel as natural as possible and to really be, as fly on the wall as possible. And we just relied on the sit down interviews to give Jimmy and Jenny more of a kind of calmer moment without the chimps, when they could breathe and reflect on some of the things that we'd film. But I think we use those quite sparingly. And a lot of it is, down to our series producer, Rob, who was self-shooting, really being there every moment of the action and capturing what was happening as it was happening.
Mm-hmm. And obviously one of the most vital elements that you're bringing forth throughout the entire series, every single moment is, like you were saying before as well, like it doesn't matter how cute they are on screen. Part of it is really highlighting the fact that the pet trade is a really huge problem, and that's how they end up in this situation to begin with. And so I just was kind of interested in the way that even in the development process, and then even whilst you were filming, that you always made sure that central message was coming forth in the information that you were relaying and the way that you were filming, and how that informed a lot of creative choices that you and the rest of the team made.
I think we all collectively felt it was really important to keep this at the forefront of our minds, but not to sort of deliver it with such a huge like sledgehammer that it became a very doomy piece of work. So to thread it through and to make sure, I mean, we made sure, I think, in the commentary and using pieces of sync from the contributors all the time about, we were reminding people all the time, you know, these baby chimps are very cute, they're adorable. I mean, they're, you know, adorable. They're adorable because they're very, very close to us. They're our closest relatives, so we see ourselves in them, but they shouldn't be there. This is an absolute tragedy. That there's even one there is a tragedy. It means they've lost their mother and they're orphans, and they will never live exactly the same kind of life as they should be living in the wild. And really, that's the truth, but it's a very bittersweet truth when you're watching it. And I think super important to remind people all the way through that that's the case.
Mm-hmm. You know, and beyond the pet trade as well, you also focus on the illegal meat trade that goes on. And there is a moment in the third episode where we actually see some of that seized and burned on camera. And I was interested in kind of the choice and the necessity in showing that, because it, you know, it can be quite graphic and it can be quite tough for some people to see that footage. But it felt like it was really a vital thing to include for people just to really understand that that is something that is going on very continuously in the area.
It's a tool that's used quite often across the illegal wildlife trade. You know, you've seen probably footage of huge piles of elephant tusks or rhino horns being burnt in somewhere like Kenya in the past, or, you know, it's a very graphic image, isn't it? And they always invite a lot of press and news people there, because the important thing is sending the message out, you know, the multiple message, what, A, that this is, you know, barbaric and wrong, but B, it's worthless. We're going to burn it anyway. Whatever you think it's worth, it's now worthless, you know. So important graphic image to have.
Mm-hmm. And on a different tangent, Lindsey, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your preparation process, because when you filmed Blood Island, you really only had a couple of days when you were actually shooting. And obviously, as you were mentioning, for this series, you were spending a whole year out there, so it was very different. But I was interested in kind of having had that experience of knowing that you needed to get all of the footage that you needed previously for another project in a very short space of time, kind of what the really vital key elements were that you needed to have set in place before you even arrived and turned the camera on for the first time on location, and kind of how that led into the process for this series and the things that you really wanted to make sure you had buttoned up before you arrived there.
Yeah, so I think the process was very different, as you mentioned. So this Baby Chimp Rescue is the first longer form TV series that I've worked on. So before that, I was working as a video and print journalist. So I was very used to going and getting a story in just a day or 2 days or 3 days, or being in Liberia for a week the first time seemed like a luxury, but it was a lot to cram into a short space of time. And I was really excited to be able to work on this project for the BBC, to have, you know, a year to follow these characters and really build that relationship and see how the chimps develop. I think the preparation was similar in terms of, you know, as Joe said, you do a lot of research about chimpanzee behavior and about what kind of story points you might hit and how you're going to achieve that before. So it's a lot of similar preparation, but just, you know, having that whole year to really follow their stories and watch them develop and grow was really amazing.
Mm-hmm. And you've also mentioned how, you know, documentaries like Orlando von Einstein's Virunga have like been really pivotal to your interest within this area. And just wanted to ask a little bit about how documentaries like that and other possible projects that have been of huge interest as you came into this space as a filmmaker after working in journalism kind of have informed the type of lens and the type of storytelling that you like to bring to the space.
Yeah, I think I'm really keen to, you know, use this platform of film, which can reach so many people and is so much more accessible, I think, than writing a newspaper article in English, perhaps. I think that was a big part of the reason why I wanted to transition more into TV. And obviously the BBC Natural History Unit has a huge amount of integrity and a huge following all over the world. And I think that we have a sort of, you know, really privileged position and opportunity to move the conservation conversation forward and to bring stories to lots of people around the world that they might not have heard of. So I'm excited to be part of that. And that's really the direction, you know, every story that I do as part of the BBC. I want it to feel like it has meaning and that it's helping some wildlife species or environment or someone somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Joe, you'd worked in a variety of different spaces as well, including, art and music documentary. And kind of what was it that kind of finally brought you down the path of environmental documentary storytelling and into your current role in the BBC that you've been in for several years now?
Yeah, so I did do documentaries, primarily arts and music documentaries prior, a long time ago. And I was led to natural history really through documentaries. I was doing some documentaries for Nat Geo when I came to Bristol, which is the sort of into the southwest of England, which is kind of the heart of natural history filming, bizarrely, in Britain, and where we're based. And for me, it's all about story. It's all about, as I really agree with Lindsey about the stories that you want to tell. And for me, it's about the skills that you bring to that, the documentary skills in order to make a story live, have an impact and a lasting impact. And that's what I'm interested in. And honestly, the most important story right now is looking after our home, our planet, our home. And I can't think of anything else more important right now.
Mm-hmm. In addition to story, one of the things that you craft so well through this series in particular is character, and not just in terms of the humans, but also the chimps. Like, you really managed to craft and give them personality. Like, Max is admittedly my absolute favorite. I'm obsessed with him. When he wrapped himself in toilet paper, I was like, you're my favorite. But that's a testament to the way that you managed to kind of capture each of their different personalities. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the journey, about making sure that you were doing that even with the chimps, and how you kind of engaged that into the storytelling.
I think it was, I'll let Lindsey say something as well, but I think right from the beginning, we were absolutely, we really wanted the chimps to have as much character as the humans. And, as I said, they're our closest living relatives, and they all do have completely different characters. They all arrive with different degrees of post-traumatic stress disorder. They recover in different ways, just like humans do. They develop in completely different ways, and some of them are very, very needy, and some of them have lots of bravado but are really quite insecure inside. They all also visually look so different. Sometimes when you're doing natural history, if you've got a sort of herd of zebra, it's difficult to tell them apart. But these are absolute character. I mean, I think Lindsey spent time on location with them, but I'm sure that she fell in love with every one of them.
Yeah, I definitely have my favorites as well, though. Bowie, I like in particular, and Ella, because she's just so like independent and doesn't know that she's tiny, is just going for it anyway. But yeah, I think that, as Joe mentioned, the chimps do absolutely have individual characters. Like, none of that really needed to be constructed. If you give them a bit of screen time and then you follow their development over the year, their characters just naturally emerge, and you can see that so clearly. Like, Max is the rambunctious, like, big man on campus, and Ella is like tiny, strong, independent little woman. They all have their own characters, and that, I don't know, being there, that was a really surprising for me to see over the year as well, because this was sort of my gateway into wildlife film, and I hadn't spent that much time with chimps before that, apart from the short film Blood Island, which was adult chimps, completely different. But yeah, just watching those characters emerge, it makes you rethink our relationship with the natural world and with animals, and how we've taken control of their lives, and really these are sentient beings with their own personalities, their own concept of their place in the world. When they're in a cage, they know they're going to be in a cage today, tomorrow, the next day. And yeah, so I hope that the documentary shows their personalities, but also opens people's eyes to that.
Mm-hmm. And when it came to the post-production and the editing side, we were talking a little bit about the development process, and you knew certain aspects of what were going to happen when you arrived on site. You knew that they were trying to move on to the new site. You knew about the training classes, but kind of taking it onto the other end now, when you're at the point of like post-production and editing, and you finally got that mass gaunt of footage, did the project kind of like drastically change and reshape a few times in editing, or was it like a very clear narrative structure and arc once you got to that point?
There's a lot of material. So you do have to make clear editorial choices within the structure of what's true and unfolding in any case. So that is the art of the cutting room.
And for each of you, what would you say, kind of looking back overall at the entire experience now of working on this project, was your biggest personal challenge in pulling all of this together?
One.
Which one? I don't know what it was for you, Lindsey. I think my biggest challenge, I suppose, or at least what I hoped to, was to make sure that we always had that editorial balance. You know, that the message, the real life message about the the plummeting numbers of Western chimpanzees in West Africa, the problems of the illegal wildlife trade, which is certainly not confined to Liberia. There are many countries in Africa and the southeast and far east, and into this country. There's a huge market for all sorts of illegal for the illegal wildlife trade coming through Heathrow. I mean, it's a huge problem. So for me, the challenge of making a really engaging, fantastic watch, but also making sure that we really left our mark and made people more aware of the issues. That was my goal.
Mm-hmm. And how about for you, Lindsey?
Probably keeping the chimps off my microphone.
Yeah.
No, I'd say it was much more probably logistical, just in terms of being on the ground and coordinating everyone's schedules and making sure we had, enough time with the chimps, but then respected the rules of the sanctuary as well and gave them space, and coordinating Jim and Jenny, who also have like extremely busy lives, and Jimmy has an entire other full-time job. So it was a lot of pieces to manage. But I think one thing that helped is that we did have a very clear remittance to tell this story, and as Joe said, to really make all the elements of it come through, that those choices were easier on location, and then we just had to worry about capturing them.
Mm-hmm. Well, it absolutely comes through. It's not just such a delightful watch, but it is such like an important and vital one, and really kind of sits with you after you finish watching it in terms of the messaging that you're getting across. And I want to thank both of you for taking time out of your day today to talk to us so much about the series.
Thanks, Mara. Thank you so much.